Hi, welcome to STEAM, a STEM enrichment course for parents, teachers, and caregivers of preschoolers. My name is Amanda Boyarshina, and I have taught kindergarten and first grade for several years. I have my master's in reading education K-12, and I have 3 of my very own children, ages almost 2, 4.5, and 8. And I'm here with my co-author, Jamie Hand, and we have an amazing preschool resource out. It's an ebook. It's called STEAM, Preschool Activities for STEM Enrichment, and it's available on Amazon, and we're here talking about it tonight because we want to inspire you to include more engineering into your everyday preschool activities. Jamie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Amanda, thank you. Once again, my name is Jamie Hand. I blog over at Handmade Kids Art. I'm also a certified art instructor. I have taught ages all the way from preschool through high school, and I've taught in the classroom and online as well. And like Amanda, I also have 3 kids of my own, a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and 6-month-old who is totally teething right now. So I certainly, am a busy parent as well. And so tonight we're just going to share some of our tips and tricks of how we incorporate engineering into our preschoolers' activities.
And Jamie and I were talking earlier that we think that engineering may be one of the easiest for both of us to incorporate or include in our everyday. I brought some of my actual bins that I use at my house, and I've used in the classroom as well. And one bin, I just have one of those, I don't know, standard organizers, and I just put a variety of wooden blocks in them. And this is what we have available this week. And so we were doing a lot of copy me towers where we pretend like one of us closes their eyes and puts our hands over the eyes, and we're like, oh, don't peek, don't peek. I'm going to build a tower. And then so we would choose 2 shapes or 3 shapes, and we would build a tower. And then we'd be like, okay, and have the big reveal. And then the other person had to build the same tower using the same colors, same sizes, and same shapes, which kind of gets complicated when you have a big variety. So we did a lot of blocks this week, and I keep them in a tub. We also were building with bricks, and I honestly have a combination because, like I said, I taught kindergarten, and we had 26 5-year-olds in a kindergarten, and so when teachers are purchasing their own materials, you do with what you can find. And I found 3 huge bins of these for $3 at a garage sale. So,
Nice.
I know. I was like, yes. So I have, like, some of them have, like, little stickers. Some of them have numbers. They're all sorts of colors. They all go together. And, like, somebody was thinking about me. So I have a whole bunch of these. But I tend to try and limit it a little bit because sometimes with preschoolers it seems like it's a good time to build big and get out every possible block or brick that you have, and sometimes it's better to kind of limit and go smaller. And I don't know how it works in your household, but I personally was at the smaller phase this week, so I brought out just a little container of bricks versus...
Well, by limiting makes for easy cleanup too. So then you're not overwhelmed at cleanup time trying to pick up all the different bricks. So I definitely think, for busy parents today, sometimes you don't necessarily have to get out the entire basket of, blocks or bricks. You can limit, definitely.
And I have dumpers, meaning my kids see a bucket and they dump it out. Like, It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a gallon or a 10-gallon, they see a bucket and they want to dump it. And so I'm like, I want to rage and engineer, but my engineers don't want to clean up. And so we've actually been talking about how building is not the only part of engineering. And so think that this week, like we do a lot of building, but this week I've really said, okay, get your papers out. Let's draw and make a plan. And so towards the end of the week, my 4-year-old was saying, oh, well, Mom, I'm going to build a tower, but I need to plan it out first. And it was really cute because he went and got his paper and pencil and drew it in his kid writing. But the last one I wanted to show you, and I don't know if you have these, Jamie, I try to get containers for everything back to that cleaning up phase. So I just stopped at Joann's and got like an organizer. But these are the new Goldie blocks.
Yes, I've seen them. We don't have them, but yes, that may be something we get soon.
Like, how cool is this? And I know they're designed for girls. They start at 4. I think they recommend for 4. And so they have some kits for 4-year-olds. And then we had a chance to try out the ones that were designed for like 8 and up. And holy buckets, they're totally for 8 and up. So we can keep them in a separate container because they're not for preschoolers. But these ones are super easy for preschoolers. And my 2 kids have been building rockets and whirligigs that fly around, and they're trying to come up with like some bridges and having these like trays to organize our building stuff has been amazing because they actually sit and take care of them when they're done. And then I can put them away. So
I love that you can just close the lid and it's all put away.
Yes, and I've made sure to tell them they can't close the lid until everything has been organized, because an engineer is somebody who's going to plan and design, and they're going to build, but they're not just going to leave their site a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been kind of talking about, there's some really good books on like building houses.
Well, it's funny because on our way to preschool, we've been passing by, they're building a new grocery store. And it's been going on for quite a while. So every day, my son, he'll point out what's new, what's different, what trucks are in the parking lot. And so we've been watching it build, and we've been talking about the different stages then, just like you mentioned, Amanda, about, you have to plan and draw, and we talked about those different things. And so it's funny to see him then translate it to his own work. So being that Halloween is coming up, for his costume, he wants to be a digger. And so I am like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? So right now he's in the planning stage of creating his costume. And so it is funny, he got out his paper and pencil and he's drawing out the plans. And then we're going to meet and discuss and come up with then how we can translate the plans into his costume. So it'll be interesting to see how this turns out. I don't know. But it's, how we had been talking about the construction of the grocery store and how they plan it and build it, and then he was able to translate that into thinking about his costume as well.
Well, and for him, that's relative. Like, he's not technically building a house, so he's got to think of, like, what can I do? And I'm sure he's got a lot of designing going on. Good thing he's got a creative mom.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, a digger. I'm like, do you want to be the construction, builder? He's like, no, I want to be the digger. So
are you guys going to, like, construct it with maybe, like, cardboard boxes?
That's what I'm thinking, because we do have quite a few diaper boxes around from our 6-month-old. So, yes, in my head, that's where I see it going. But I want him to kind of lead first, and we'll see how it turns out. If you're curious, follow along at my blog. I'll post our final outcome on there.
Which is super funny, because my kids decided they're sewing their own. Like, okay, whatever. Long as I don't have to do it, I'm not buying them. You want to make them, great.
Hey, that's great.
So now, with my building materials, like I showed you things that I have out in my like play area or learning area this week. But one of the tricks I learned as a kindergarten teacher is that it's good to have some of the same materials out. In my classroom, I always had wooden blocks, and the wooden blocks always had a home. So the children knew when they were done with building, the blocks had to go back in exactly the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like what I'm trying to do at home, where if you play with Goldie blocks, they immediately go back in the case, and it gets put away, and then it gets closed. So each building thing has a home, but then I also try to rotate, because if we're only limiting ourselves to building with wooden blocks, we maybe not, I don't know, thinking outside the box, or we may not be challenging our creativity and problem solving as much. So next week, I'm actually going to take away the wooden blocks, and I might replace them with Lincoln Logs or Connects, or what are some other ones that you might have in your house, Jamie?
Well, we don't have a lot of the kind of toy building blocks. So we do have wooden blocks. We do have, the bricks like you showed. And we are just starting to kind of get into regular size Legos with my 5-year-old. But other than that, I'll just set out random materials. So any kind of just through the recycle bin, I may take out any small size cardboard boxes and maybe even tape it up, or a simple way is to even, almost like you're wrapping a present, wrap it in like a grocery bag, a brown paper bag, and then it's a nice smooth surface that they can draw on, make it into a house, turn it into something else. We also use cardboard tubes a lot, or straws. So we kind of do a lot of just whatever I have around the house. I'll be like, okay, this week we'll do this.
Toothpicks and marshmallows.
So not all the time does it have to be. I think sometimes parents like, oh, well, I don't have that toy, so we can't do that activity. There are other ways you can still incorporate building without necessarily having those toys. Now, yeah, for Christmas, I think we will be looking into getting some new building supplies, because my 5-year-old's really shown a great interest in it. So, that's something we may do, but, sometimes I'll just, and I think I mentioned this before in some of our earlier hangouts, is after rest time, he'll come downstairs and I'll have laid out just different materials. And one thing, we usually have wooden blocks out a lot, but I do put them away sometimes too, just to kind of make them disappear, and then when they reappear, they're fully engaged once again. But I'll also mix in materials with the wooden blocks. So recently I sliced up a pool noodle, being that's kind of the end of summer, and so we didn't need the pool noodle really, and it was taking up space in the garage. And did you know it cuts very easily with a knife? So I sliced it into slices, and I sliced up some sponges, dried ones, and just left those with the wooden blocks. And my 5-year-old and 3-year-old had a great time. My 3-year-old, she built more houses with them, but my 5-year-old, he started to actually make some cars and a tractor and a race car by putting a strip of sponge through the little slice of pool noodle, making wheels. And I didn't even think about that. And so it was I'm like, oh, wow, yeah. So sometimes just by laying out the materials, let them do the work. So it makes it easy.
Yeah, I think it's a good mix, and we have discussed it before. Like, sometimes it's okay to say, oh, here's my tower, can you copy it and play that game? Mm-hmm. Or here's our problem, how can we come up with a solution? And then sometimes it's just, here you go. Like, what can you come up with? What can you create? And it's so important to have a mix. And two, like you were saying, even if you don't have a lot, like, I had enough for 26 children. So
not everyone has all those resources or materials. So just trying to keep it real for those that don't.
Well, and I think that a lot of people do have things like mega blocks or some sort of building blocks. And I think that even if you divide it into two different sets. For example, you could put all of your red, like, bricks in a bag or a box and just let the kids play with red. Just to change it up. Like,
No,
to make it,
I completely agree.
to
Just
make it
sometimes by
exciting.
changing it a little bit, it brings them back in, keeps them interested and engaged. And, as you said, like a mix of having a free range of, create whatever you want, but then also sometimes, like you said, having that challenge set, like build with only red today. And then they have to go around with, looking for things that are red and what can they build with that. I
Mhm.
completely agree that it's good to have a mix of both ways.
Well, and I had a mom of a 2.5, 3-year-old, and she said that they got their child one of those wooden choo-choo train sets.
Mm-hmm.
And so they built it like the whole track as a family. And her kid didn't take it apart. And so she questioned me. She says, well, should I be taking this apart every time? And I asked her, well, is your child still engaged? And she's like, yes, he plays with it for like 30 to 45 minutes every day. I said, don't change anything. Like, you don't have to change it. But as soon as he starts not wanting to play and engage in that activity, then it's time for a change.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids tend to work some in weeks, some of the materials in a couple weeks, but there has to be some sort of rotation. Or I find that like with our Goldie Blocks, they've been out for 2 weeks, and I've like high interest right away. So they were playing around 2 hours a day. And it was amazing because all 3 of my kids were sitting and building and talking, and I was like, I get to make dinner because
You're like,
they're good.
whoa, keep this, follow this up.
And then like they did about an hour the next day, and then it leveled off about an hour a day. And then now they're at about 10, 15 minutes a day. And then today they didn't even play with it. So it was like, okay, yep, it's about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And then I go put it in the closet, and I'll bring out like Lincoln Logs, and they'll be really excited again. And then they kind of peter out. And then, in 2 weeks, I'll bring the Goldie Box back because, the kids need to keep building and interacting instead of, like, a lot of people say, oh, my kid's tired of toys, and they get rid of them. I don't think you necessarily have to get rid of them because as children change, they play in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of taking a break or a toy rotation and bringing them back sometimes maybe help them gain interest in becoming engineers again. So this week we had an awesome challenge, and I hope all of you stop by Handmade Kid Art and the Educator Spin on it to check it out. This is actually a challenge designed by Jamie, so I'm going to let her tell you about it.
So my son, he loves to build, which I've already said. So this was his favorite activity in the entire book that we made. He loved this one. In fact, we've done it several times since. And so this was one of the activities where there was a challenge. I did present the idea, and before I even mentioned what the activity was, we just started talking about how a house was made, how it's constructed, and it rains a lot where we live, and so we were discussing about, how we stay dry and how the rain doesn't come in our house. And so through this discussion, he learned, it's because we have the roof that, we don't get wet, the rain doesn't come in. So then I presented to him, I'm like, well, let's do a challenge of, can you make a rain shelter for one of your toys? So he went and he selected the toy, and then I had arranged a whole wide variety of materials. Well, I say wide variety. It wasn't all that wide, but for him it was wide. And so I had some different blocks set out. I had some different other things like straws. I had little foam blocks that are just from the dollar store. And I let him experiment first. Now, the first thing he did was he grabbed the straws and he was like, yes, straws. Because we hadn't built with those in a while, so he was like super excited. But then he quickly learned he couldn't get the structure he wanted with the straws. So then he learned to move on and he tried a different technique. And for him, he tried the foam blocks then. And he was so funny, and he would put a piece of tape over it and put the next layer. So it was almost like the brick and the mortar that he had seen. And so he was kind of imitating that. And so it was really fun to watch him, kind of go through this process. And I would ask him questions along the way, like how can you make the walls stand up straight, or how, make sure. And I would just kind of, to keep him on track, because his walls are, starting to lean, and it's like, okay, let's take a look at this. Do you think that's, how can we support the roof? So I was there engaging with him, but I was letting him do the construction and the trial and error. So like he started with the straws and then was like, this isn't working, so let's try a new way. And then, of course, squirting the water to imitate the rain. That was his favorite part. And he was super excited to see that his toy had stayed dry. And I would love to do, we haven't actually done it yet, but to do an activity then, almost an extension where it's kind of the next level. Can we make something that actually goes outside in the rain and that toy stay dry? So, we kind of did, it was kind of the first step to it, but you could take it and extend the activity, even further. And I know, Amanda, your boys came up with some creative ways to solve the solution as well.
Well, actually, this engineering challenge came at the perfect time because we've been having a lot of rain here, and it's finally cool enough that we can have a campfire at night. So we have been gathering like logs and sticks, and we piled them up, and they've been getting wet. So we weren't able to have a fire because all of our logs were wet. And so I asked the children, I'm like, what are we going to do? We need to come up with a shelter to keep the logs dry. And so I kind of started with that real life problem because their chore is to pick up the sticks. And so I kept saying, oh, we're going to pick up sticks for a campfire. But here's the problem, we can't have a campfire now because all of our sticks are wet. So they were pretty disappointed. I said, okay, now we need to come up with a solution. And so my preschooler is absolutely in love with tape. I mean, like, tape is his best friend. I cannot keep a roll of tape in my house. If he would go through 3 or 4 rolls. So he comes up with a way to test his hypothesis, which is make a tape cover. Swear to God. He's literally like,
I like it.
So I gave him, he has his own rolls of tape now. I have my tape and he has his tape. His tape is like the blue painter's tape because it's a lot easier to get off of things than the Scotch tape is. So he's got blue paint tape. And so he spends time and he like rips a piece off and then he layers it so that it's like a wall of tape. So he says, I'm going to build one big enough to go over the log. And I'm just in my head going, oh my goodness, all this tape is going to be wasted on this cover. So he said, let's try it out with something smaller. And she's like, oh, okay. I'm going to cover a piece of cardboard. So he covered a piece of cardboard this big with tape. And he set it outside in the rain. And then the next day, he opened it up, and the cardboard was inside, and he was devastated. He looked at me like, the tape didn't work. The water soaked right through it. It's never going to be a good cover for our firewood. I said, no, it's not. Let's go inside and experiment with some of our building materials. And I said, let's see if we can come up with a structure I said, and let's just grab like a toy, pick any toy. Of course, he picked his sister's dog. If you want to see the picture, you have to stop by the educator spin on it. And as I said, we were doing Goldie blocks. So he built his structure over Goldie blocks. Well, happens to have holes in it. So, like you were saying, it's important to let the children fail. I mean, like, it's hard because I'm sitting there next to him and I want to tell him it's not going to work. And you sometimes just have to bite your tongue because...
Totally, yes. It's hard to do, but it's important, yes.
Like, you want to help them, but at the same time, you need them to understand. Well, so he built his structure and he took with the squirt bottle and he's squirting it, squirting. Of course, it's not getting through too much because the holes are small. So he checks the little dog underneath and he's like, oh, that's not bad. We could use it outside. And then he looks at me and he asks his brother, can I test it on you?
I love it.
You know, my toddler's like, yes, a hat. So he put it on his head. He's up here spraying water on his head, and my toddler's going, wet, I wet, because of course it's going through the holes. And you know, this was about the best instantaneous response that a preschooler can get. He goes, I guess my structure has some problems. He looks around and he's like, forget building. He took one of these and just turned it upside down and set it right on the dog. And he goes, I don't need to test it on the dog. And he puts it right on my toddler's head. And then he starts spraying my toddler's head. And of course, the toddler didn't say anything. So he's like, hey, Mom, plastic works. Now we just need to get a big plastic Tupperware to put outside.
There you go. He solved the problem.
Yeah, we don't have to build anything.
But I love, though, the process of, and that trial and error and, you know, testing a real-life subject, too, your brother, you know.
Gotta ask first.
No, that's great, though, to see that process. And like you said, I think the hardest thing as a parent is not stepping in right away. And because you can see it happening. Like when I was talking about my son and he was building the wall and it's leaning over. Yeah, it fell over about 3 or 4 times before then. I was like, okay, let's look at it. What, you know, why do you think it keeps falling over? And so what can you do differently? And so, you know, you have to let them experience that before then they can have that feeling of success. And you want them to discover it so they have that ownership of the idea as well. Like your moms.
Like that. Why is this happening? How do you think? Oh, well, what do you think we could do? Or what do you think we could change to make it more successful? Like asking them questions when they're frustrated. Like, because they do get to a point where there's just, you have to provide something. Or
some sort of guidance.
Totally lose interest and not be excited about engineering, which is not what we want. We want them excited and engaged about it. And if you have a group of children, oftentimes, like, you can sit and watch them and they'll help each other problem solve those things. But if you only have one child, you kind of have to be that sounding board as a parent or a caregiver during that play of, oh, what do you think? Or could we do this? Or do you think we could change something, like you said, to support this base a little bit more? So I think it's important, like, why, who, what, when,
what
where.
if. That's always a big one. If you can't think of anything in the moment, just go with what if we, and then like fill in with what needs to be. So that's always a good backup for when, you know, you're not on, you don't have the activity right in front of you. But yeah, what if, or, you know, and turn it on the child too. Point out the problem and say, okay, so why do you think this is happening? And let them kind of figure it out.
Yeah, I definitely think that we're going to continue with some more building challenges because currently we do not have a place for our firewood to stay dry. So we actually just did the challenge this week, and we're working on it. So I think that we're going to bring it back out to the outside into the real life, and I think I'm going to let them come up with a solution. They decided at the current moment that we have one of those play forts, and it has like a plastic slide. And so after this experiment, the kids are like, oh, well, what do we have that's already there that's plastic? And they're like, the slide. So they moved the firewood like right underneath the slide so that it formed the thing. Because like my son was saying, well, just use an already made plastic bin. And so, of course, my 8-year-old was listening in, and she's like, wait a sec, you know, because 8-year-olds kind of think a little differently than preschoolers. She's like, we already have that outside. Like, let's go, let's go. And so we sat and moved all the wood underneath there. Of course, it's a very little space. So they were like, well, what are we going to do for the sides? Because they still can get the sides in. And so I like how they're kind of problem solving it and trying to come up with their own real world solution, because that's really what an engineer does, is they see a problem and they come up with a bunch of multiple solutions. And sometimes they'll test those solutions to come up with what they feel is the best answer to solve that problem. Like,
well, and I love how you were able to relate it to a problem that your house was having, and that's a great way to do it. For my son, we had the discussion beforehand just about rain and why we say dry. So you do want to connect it somehow to a prior knowledge that they do have, so they can kind of comprehend and understand what the challenge or what the problem is about. So, in your case, it was about having dry firewood, and for us, it was about, well, why do we stay dry in our house? It was kind of, ours may have been a little more simplified, but it's still connecting to that, connecting it to that preschool level, because sometimes people may say, well, engineering, well, how can preschoolers do that? It's more just about setting up those skills of understanding the challenge, like we mentioned, making plans, coming up with different solutions, testing them out, and also learning how to fail, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And coming up with multiple solutions. I think at your house and at my house, their first effort didn't work. I mean, and that's okay. If your first effort works, great, but sometimes there's even higher learning that occurs if you don't. And there's also there's a book, I think it's called What Will You Wear, that I have in my bookshelf. Again, kindergarten teachers. I have a million of books, but it's just this really quick science reader, and it talks about what we wear on a rainy day and how some materials are absorbent, and how what's going to be your choice. Are you going to want plastic made jacket or a cotton made jacket in the rain? And so that kind of ties in. If you're going to build a shelter, are you going to want to build a shelter that's absorbent or that repels the water? And so there's tons of different possibilities. You can talk about your roof, you can talk about raincoats, you can talk about firewood. It's kind of looking at that challenge and, like you said, making it relate to what a 4-year-old might think about or what they think is important. Even as I'm talking rubber boots, my kids are huge into the wellies. They know that tennis shoes will soak up all the water and the rain boots will repel them, and so their socks will stay dry. There's tons of ways to make it.
You can take that example and just turn your child like, well, why do you think these boots work better than your tennis shoes? It's just as simple as that can just set off the activity and just get that thinking going of what materials work best.
Well, and didn't an engineer usually design? There's so many engineers out now that are amazingly talented in plastics, in eco-friendly engineering. I can't even think of all the terms. So what I'm trying to do is raise a kid who is thinking and can maybe design and solve those problems in creative and unique ways. So we'll keep building, and I'll keep rotating my toys. And I think that I need to start brainstorming maybe a list of field trips we can take, because like you said you were driving past a house being built or a store being built.
Yeah, the grocery store, which I'm so excited for when it opens, but it's not open yet. But we still do. We're driving by it. You know, we go twice a day to school and on the way home, and it is very close to being finished. And so, but it's been a while because it was started at the end of the last school year. But it's been fun to watch the progress, and we just discuss it then the rest of the car ride because that's what he's into. And you know, you just find those things that hooks them in, and then you ask the questions to get them to keep thinking.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of what I would love to find, is someplace that you can kind of go and say, look at all these grown-ups are building and coming up with these great ideas. I know there's a really good kids museum in Minnesota that has a lot of engineering and invention challenges, and they talk about, you know, there's a lot of teenagers and young adults that come as volunteers and show kids how exciting it is to build and create. I'm like, I want that close to me. Even something like the Kennedy Space Center might be a really nice field trip for us to take, or even some Lego challenge groups. I've seen the library, I think, around our house host them, where the high school students come in and build with the children and talk to them about engineering. So that's going to kind of be my goal, is to keep my eyes and ears open for opportunities to experience and show him kind of more real life engineering.
Well, and I think with, you know, in education today with STEM activities, although we're calling it STEAM with art added in, I think there's a lot more kind of opportunities out there being developed. And so definitely we'll kind of keep our eyes open and keep posts going on our blogs about what opportunities are out there.
And we did start a Pinterest board that we've been sharing, and we pin different STEAM activities that we find engaging for our kids and articles that we find around the internet. So you're welcome to follow the board, and I can link to it in the captions below, as well as our websites. We're 3 weeks in to our STEM enrichment course for parents, teachers, and caregivers. So please do the engineering activity this week. Check in on either Handmade Kid Art or the Educator Spin on it, and let us know what building material your child uses to create their rain shelter. All it does is take a little comment, and that will let us know that you're doing it with your preschooler. Next week we have, it's art, right?
Yes, I'm so excited. Yeah, this was my son's favorite. The engineering activities, art was my favorite. So go figure.
That's awesome. So next week, Sunday evening at 8 o'clock, we will be meeting for a discussion on art. And if you don't want to wait for Sunday, you may stop by on Friday afternoon, where we will be announcing the challenge. So thank you for being here, and happy engineering.